2023. The time is 7:02. All rise for the Pledge of Allegiance. Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America, to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. So tonight's agenda, first of all, I guess I would just say this is the most people I've seen at a meeting in quite some time, at least 7 or 8 meetings. It's good to see everyone. For consideration of tonight's agenda, we have 2 main topics. One is what we're calling a conceptual review of the enclave of Eastport, and the other is the continuation of review of our zoning ordinance draft for Articles 6, 7, 8, and 9. With the agenda for this evening, I'd like to open it up to the Planning Commission members to see if there's any items to consider or anything that would suggest to be changed for this evening. If not, could I have a motion to approve the agenda as documented or drafted?
I'll second it.
Discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
We'll move forward with the agenda. Are there any Planning Commission members that have a conflict of interest for this evening's event?
No.
Hearing none?
Andy, real quick.
Yes.
I'd just like to introduce
Oh,
Jeff
yes.
Clark. He's our newest planning commission member. This is his first meeting, so dive right in, get started. So-
Actually, yes. Jeff,
And just to
welcome.
make sure the planning commissioners have all your mics on for the people listening at home.
Jeff, I apologize for that. I should have done that initially.
No
I
worries.
was thinking
Thank
ahead
you.
of the agenda here. Would you mind giving a quick background about yourself and? just for
Sure.
others?
I have been a homeowner in Torch Township for 18 years. I've had a lifelong connection to the area. I am a practicing attorney. I work for a company called BSF Corporation. I work remotely, so I'm pleased to be here and look forward to the future of the township.
Yes, thank you so much. So moving into the approval of the meeting minutes from June 13th of 2023. I was not at this particular meeting, so any comments or questions from the commission members?
And last month, or it wasn't last month, it was the month before, the reason we did not approve these is they did not have an end time and a motion for that adjournment.
Okay.
So that was the issue for the 13th and maybe the 26th and the 28th, is that we needed to get that end time on there. So that was the correction.
Okay, so we have the adjournment time at 7:24 for the 13th, so that's been addressed. Any other questions or edits? Hearing none, can we have a motion to approve the minutes for June 13th?
I'll make a motion to approve all the minutes. Or did you just want the 13th?
I was just looking for the
Just the
13th.
13th. I'm good with all of them though, but I'll make the motion for the 13th of June.
Have a second?
Second.
Discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Okay, move on to June 26th. I was at this one. We do have the adjournment time on this one. Any discussion or questions about these minutes for June 26th? Hearing none, could I have a motion to approve the minutes as drafted?
Motion to approve.
You have a second?
I'll second.
Discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Meeting minutes for June 26th are approved. Moving on to the minutes for June 28th. Any questions or comments? Hearing none, can I have a motion to approve the minutes of June 28th?
I make a motion to approve the minutes of June 28th.
May I have a second?
I'll second.
Discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Minutes of June 28th are approved as drafted. We also have the August 8th minutes. Any questions on the August 8th meeting minutes? I guess I have a quick question. Sarah, how far did we get on, thinking back to, for the Article 6, we spent quite a bit of time talking about it, but we didn't quite get through it all the way.
Yeah, I think we were talking about Article 3 and we got down into wind and solar and that's where that motion happened, but I don't recall any other discussion in Article 6.
Okay.
So we'll just pick up there really quickly, I think, unless somebody recalls it differently.
That's the way I remember it.
Okay. Any comments or questions on the minutes from August 8th? If none, may I have a motion to approve the minutes as drafted for August 8th?
So moved.
May I have a second?
Second?
Discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Minutes for August 8th are approved as drafted. So now we move into public comment on the agenda items only for tonight. If anyone is like to come forward and make any comments, please fill out the comment card and fill it out, hand it in, and keep your comments to 3 minutes or less, please. Please keep them pointed towards my direction.
And I think I only have one so far, just Maureen's, and I'll read hers.
Okay. Can you read her full name and where she's her address?
Yes, Maureen Lorenz from Bay Harbor Bay Harbor Club Lane in Kuwaitan. First heard of this rezoning and thought housing is needed in northern Michigan. However, this proposed housing is a strange product to market to seniors with the amount of stairs and limited green space. I wondered if these are investment properties that will soon be VRBOs or Airbnbs. How will rentals be handled in this development? Torch Lake Township already has a high percentage of second homes and rentals. The density at 8 units to the acre is, according to the Metropolitan Council, urban. 3 units is still suburban. The township completed a master plan and residents want to maintain the rural character of their community. The recommendation was to maintain existing development densities. This is way too dense. And recommendations for the master plan was to promote development with 50% open space. This specific intersection was recognized as better served by commercial development rather than dropping in housing with no supporting infrastructures, no connecting walkways, no planning for the hamlet of Eastport. A case could be made for residential, but it should be accomplished in such a way that fits overall within the corridor and rural character. The township, as I understand it, is having difficulty with Barnes Park request to add 100 campsites. This is almost half again as much traffic. I would say that a traffic study is in order for the intersection of M88 and US 31. If one traffic light is required, it should not be community taxpayers paying that cost, but should be fully the responsibility of the developer. The density is an issue for another reason. 42 units with perhaps 2 residents per unit is 84 people on one well system. That's a lot of water being pumped out of the ground, and there's no recharge area. That well system will operate like a small municipal water system that needs testing and reports every month. 42 units on 5 acres seems these residents would be withdrawing more water than their 5 acres could produce or entitle them to. Again, this is urban density that should be supported by infrastructure in an urban setting. And what would happen if the well is contaminated? What is the history of this area? Were there underground storage tanks for gas stations? Contaminated plumes have a way of moving through the soil and water table. And then there's a septic system for 42 units. The developer claims he has tanks that can handle this. Please provide locations where these tanks are being used and the number of residents served and for how long have these tanks operated. The technicality of septic systems has been relatively the same for centuries and is a matter of volume first and infiltration next. With 5 acres being built out to almost every square inch, I think I have to have proof. Wells, septic system, all this requires electric energy. What storms happen and power is lost? What of the generators for 42 units? The natural resources will be taxed. Everything here flows to the bay. Stormwater is amazingly absorbed into the sandy soil quickly here in Michigan, but always a concern. This is a lot of hard surface area with the usual particulate matter and contaminations accumulating. Does all of this hard surface drain to that tiny bioswale? Who will be responsible for making sure that this operating property and filters out, that is operating properly and filters out particulates and contaminants? And the developer has has a ready-made product that is being shoehorned into a location because it's available. There is no planning for connectivity or consideration of the master plan. Careful consideration is needed, recognizing the precedent this development sets and how it will tax existing resources. This is a conceptual review. I'm sure 42 units means maximum profitability. However, a decision about all of this was decided when creating master plan, which wasn't that long ago. The decision is to maintain the rural character and quality of Torch Township. I don't see anything here tempting enough to deviate from that plan. The renderings are misleading. The plans show flat front rows of buildings and no room for native tree plantings. That was it. Thank you, Maureen.
Thank you. Any other public comments for this evening? Okay, none. We'll move on to the correspondence. Any correspondence?
There is a questions and comments from Bill Dvorak that was on your desk. He's not able to attend tonight's meeting, so he just wanted to provide those comments.
Anything else besides Bill's memo? Okay. Moving on to unfinished business. Anything to cover there, Sarah?
No.
Okay, so we'll move into the main new business items for this evening. First is the concept review, special use permit 2023-02, the Enclave of Eastport, multiple family development. So I think with this, Sarah, I guess I'd turn it to you for a moment to give a summary of how we kind of arrived where we are this evening. And then we'll invite the applicant, or the conceptual review applicant, to come forward and make a few comments.
Sure. So I provided a brief memo in your packet about this project, where it's located, how we got here to the conceptual review process. So they've asked for conceptual review. Their application is, complete enough to get it in front of the Planning Commission, but there are still items that are missing. So before it can be reviewed for final site plan, there will be additional information that's needed, but they're looking to kind of get a feel from the Planning Commission if there's any questions or concerns related to the proposed plan so that they can take that to move forward. One of the questions is related to density. So in meeting with the applicant about their project, the current zoning ordinance does not talk about density in the village district. And so there's not good guidance on what that number should be for density. So that's kind of, I think, the big goal looking at this, is trying to get an idea of what that density should be on that property so they can move forward. One of the comments, and I mentioned it in my report, is there is a road that's undeveloped. So this is a part of platted lots and a platted subdivision. There's existing, basically, paper roads, if you will, that are there, and that will need to be abandoned at some time. That'll be the developer's responsibility to go through that through that process. And as Bill mentions in his, it talks about circuit court to vacate the alley, which is correct. And, at some time, the township will be named in that, because that's how it works to abandon a portion of a plat and restructure it. So I think that for the development, that would be important to either have that process underway or approved before the Planning Commission is, approving a plan for property that the applicant doesn't even own or have the ability to currently own without going through the court process. So, but I would encourage you not to focus on, that component, since that's outside of the Planning Commission. That's going to be a township board action. Planning Commission won't be involved in that vacating of that road. Does anybody have any questions for me before we hear from the applicant?
Can you provide a little bit of an overview of, in this case, the process of our process for reviewing a conceptual review in this case?
Yeah, so for conceptual review, our current ordinance doesn't really talk about a conceptual review, so that's why it's there's a little bit more detail. A lot of ordinances will talk about, they can even come in with a sketch to get some input. It's non-binding, on the Planning Commission. It's more of a discussion about the property. So from a Planning Commission perspective, after you hear from the applicant, be an opportunity for the Planning Commission to ask questions and get some more feedback and input from the applicant. And then, if you have any general comments about the project or concerns, to also to voice that as well, because that'll help them moving forward. And especially if there's something that might be able to be worked towards, sort of a resolution that you'd like to see, that gives the applicant an opportunity to try to provide that on the plans. Keeping in mind, long-term, this is a special use permit. So with a special use permit, you're familiar with that process, but we will have a public hearing at the planning commission level for the public, and anybody that's within 300 feet will get notified of that, as well as in the newspaper. And then the planning commission has specific standards and criteria that are listed in the ordinance for both the site plan and the special use application at the time that we have a complete application. So you're not going to be going through all that, when we approve those and you kind of get to that part and you're going, oh, we got to walk through every one of these. You're not doing that tonight. You don't have to go into that much detail. This is more just kind of that informal preliminary discussion about the project.
Any questions from any of the commission members with Sarah or for Sarah? So I think with that, we'd like to invite the applicant to come forward and provide an overview of what they're seeking to accomplish here.
Thank you. Hi, good evening, everybody.
And you have to speak really close to that mic. You're welcome to take it out of the stand and hold it if you like to walk around, but you got to be really close so that the people at home can hear you.
Okay, my name is Mike Fellows. I am a Michigan licensed builder and broker. I've been in business for myself for about 30 years. I have a partner on this property. His name is Al Tansky. He is also a Michigan resident, but he's a combination Michigan and Florida resident now. He could not be here tonight. Sarah, thanks for the introduction. And I confess I'm rather low tech. We don't have any kind of PowerPoint presentation or anything, but I just had an idea noticing that big binder clip right there on the table. If there's any way I could snatch 2 of those, I could put the larger scale plan up on that board, I think, and then maybe people could see it. Anybody who hasn't seen it, it might be helpful to describe, get an understanding of it, if you don't mind.
Yeah, she's going to go get some.
I don't know if I'm allowed. It's okay if I move the flag? I kind of pulled it out just a little bit.
You can put it back behind the board a little bit, Andy, if you want.
Sorry, again, it's kind of low tech, but hopefully it helps a little bit. So, a couple things. As Sarah said, the property is a part of a very old platted subdivision that kind of stretched from the western end of it all the way across 31, and I'm not even sure how far it used to go. But portions of the plat obviously have already been abandoned, which is just a legal process. Like you do have to go through the courts. And to build whatever else is, the antique shop there, there's a Verizon maintenance building there. Across the east side of 31, there's a couple buildings there, and those were all part of the old plat. So we are aware that we have to go through the steps of getting that plat officially abandoned. And as Sarah said, it's kind of a separate process. It would have to happen before you all could formally approve anything. So that would be something we would do along the way. Our goal is to build some very nice, of course, condominium homes on the property, kind of catering to boaters, because the larger building, which would go on the west side there, is intended to be a boat storage building, combination, possibly some kind of lounge or common gathering area for the people who own the condos. That building is very, very preliminary. We don't have a full design of that yet. But the goal is to have, like I said, kind of a gathering place, kind of an indoor-outdoor type space that would front on 88. So it's visible and very inviting, we think. The second, I had submitted a second drawing of an elevation of a style of a building that came to the packets later. And that better describes or better gives you an idea of what we want this indoor-outdoor space to look like. So to date, we have been to various state and county agencies doing some investigations on the property. We've met with the health department. We have done soil investigations on the property. At the time we did that investigation, we were told, I can't remember the gentleman's name, but that the soils are perfect for a septic system, an on-site septic disposal system. We have the space for not only the main field, plus the reserve field that we would need, and that at the time, he told us it would support probably at least 48 residential units. So we do not believe we are overtaxing the property as far as capacity for septic. And then similarly, we met with Eagle on a well system. We know that we have to design a certain type of well system for the property that is big enough and redundant enough to provide water for the proposed 42 units. And we were told by Eagle the property, the existing aquifer is more than adequate to support that. All these details have to be worked out. Of course, this is, as Sarah said, this is for our purposes, really an informational, just kind of a discussion of our concept to present it to you, get as much input from you as you can, feedback from you. As Sarah mentioned, one of our early questions, what is a permitted density? The zoning on all the properties is village business, which is very broad, which is great in some cases, but it's also a little difficult to kind of pin down, what rules should we be following? So we were trying to get that determined. And apparently the ordinances, the zoning ordinance, the master plan does not specify what could be, should be, would be the permitted density. It's more governed by what does the property itself support, and of course, what does the township want? This is your town. So, we would love to have input on anything you guys have ideas on, designs of buildings, use of the property. We think it's a fantastic location for a small residential condominium community. Obviously, anybody who's a boater, this is paradise up here. The back of the property backs up to the eastern edge of Barnes Park, as everybody knows, and in 5 minutes you can walk out the back and be at the bay, on a beach at the bay there. The views are great, the waterways are great, that amenity is good, being close to Torch Lake Cafe doesn't hurt. So we think there's some very good potential for this property. It can be very exciting. The units that we would propose are also still somewhat in flux. They are intended to be 2 or 3 story type townhome structures. So nobody above you, nobody below you, but you would be part of an attached building with anywhere from 4 to 6 to maybe 8 units per building. We would have the option of elevators. There's a product like this that's being built. It's not the same product. We don't have the product finally designed. It's not something that we've built before and trying to squeeze in anywhere. But there's an option. They do accommodate an elevator. So if an elderly person, anybody who just wanted to be able to have an elevator in their unit, they could. We're intending they're going to be maybe 1,300, 14, 15, maybe 1,600 square feet, roughly. At this point, we don't really know. Again, which is why we're here. The current use of the property, it's vacant, as you probably all know. There's an old building that's had some different uses on it in the past, but it's vacant, not being used at all. There's some trucks that use the property to park occasionally there. And to the left, immediately, there's those 2 storage buildings, which is owned by someone else. That's not part of the property, part of the project. There's a lot of specifics. I guess rather than me going through the list, I'd kind of just like to open it up to, obviously you have had some time to look at the plan. You must have a lot of questions. And I'd like to get you that chance to do that. Just want to make sure I didn't miss anything of the other. Oh, we've talked to MDOT, we've talked to our civil engineers about the traffic. This type of development, if it remains at 42 units, our engineers have told us that the total of inbound, outbound traffics in the AM peak hour is 15 trips. And in the afternoon peak hour, inbound and outbound total will be 18 trips. Given that, which isn't very many, again, MDOT has told us that the existing roads have no problem handling the capacity of that kind of traffic. Again, that's peaks, just in the mornings and the afternoons. There are no existing public utility infrastructure like water or sewer anywhere near enough to the property to bring them to it. We did look at that. That would be preferred, even by us, if we could do that, but it's impossible. Let me think here. Talked about the water system. We know we have to design that. The existing roads are okay. There's not very much vegetation on the property. There's some trees kind of way down at the southeast corner, close to the intersection, which those could be preserved, and those would be kind of the backdrop of where we would have our sewage disposal fields. And there's a few trees up in the northern side, the western, toward the north boundary, but nothing really notable there, and so those would have to come down too to make the development. But then there's plenty of room for us to be, I mean, we have to meet your landscape ordinances, and we would probably exceed those greatly. There's plenty of room for stormwater rain gardens, which we've got, engineers been looking at some of those preliminary designs. Plenty of room for other attractive vegetation. And really from the way the plan is laid out, we spent a lot of time on that, from the intersection of 31 and 88, when you look west toward the property, the whole front is designed to be open. The buildings are kind of set back from the road, and then the big boat storage community gathering building is also kind of as far west from the intersection as we could get it. I guess that's it. Would like to discuss this as much as you want. We appreciate this opportunity to be here. Again, as Sarah said, I know we're not requesting any formal action. One thing I would differ with you, Sarah, the zoning ordinance does specifically provide for this meeting, a pre-application conference. And I got to thank you for the help, getting the plan to this point. And there's a lot of things, like she said, that are not fully developed on the plan, but at this stage, they wouldn't be anyways. So I'll stop. I'll just entertain any questions you might have, please.
I have a quick question to start things off here. So who owns the property now?
It's owned by a holding company, family that predominantly lives in Indiana. And they also have property here in Central Lake.
Okay, so would you be purchasing the property from them and developing it? Is
Yes,
that the
sir.
plan? So-
Exactly.
But you do not own it today?
We do not own it yet. We have a signed agreement to purchase the property.
Okay.
And the owners provided documentation that they're okay with them moving forward with their application. I didn't put that in your packet, but we have that on file.
Okay. Well, I guess just open it up for questions for the commission at this point.
I can flip to another sheet that shows the development. I just thought for introducing the property, this aerial view shows the best.
Mike, would you like me to speak to the ownership?
If you like to, sure.
Yeah, I represent the owner of the.
Can you come up to the
Yes,
microphone,
please.
please? And I think that you could flip that to the site plan development while he's talking. That might be helpful.
Yeah, I represent the ownership of it. It's owned by an LLC. I'm the manager of that LLC. The 100% owner of the LLC is an 84-year-old woman in northern Indiana who's in full-time dementia care. So the property's being sold so it can be developed to help take care of her dementia care down there. So I'm fully responsible for whatever decisions are made regarding the LLC and selling the property. And she's owned it for, I think, 5 years.
Okay, thank you.
And I'm happy to answer any questions in that regard as the owner as well.
I'm wondering if you received the questions that Bill DeVork posted, and hopefully the audience here has those, and I just wondered if you would address some of those. I thought they were well put together, so.
I have not
He
received.
did,
No,
Bill's
they were
comments.
provided and shared tonight, so
Oh.
we should go through them. In fact, the first question was Bill's, that I asked was Bill's.
Right. Well, his second question was, has the applicant ever developed entitlement through a full occupancy, a development of similar scope, size, scale? If so, could you give some information about that?
Yes, short answer is yes, I have. All downstate though, we've developed very, very similar 41 unit site condominium property outside of Mason, Michigan. We developed I had a different partner at the time, 47 unit condominium in Milford, Michigan. And we've developed all of these, starting with vacant land, developing, building, selling, occupying, everything, finishing. And then about 124 homes in 3 different single-family residential developments in Novi, Michigan.
So it's Novi, Milford, and what was the first
And
one?
Mason, outside Mason,
Mason is,
Michigan,
that's.
southeast of Lansing.
So, okay. By Okemos, isn't that the,
Close, it's the
Yeah,
exit, so
okay.
Mason, Okemos, yeah, north to
Okay.
Okemos, south to Mason, off of I-96.
Can we get the references for those?
Sure, meaning, when you say,
if there, could you provide the addresses of those?
absolutely.
How did you come up with 42 units fitting into this particular footprint, in this particular area? I mean, how did you come across this property being available and saying, okay, it looks like a good spot for this type of setup? How did that come about?
It started with my partner Al. He knows the agent for the LLC that owns the property. And Al is a lifelong boater himself, he's a Great Lakes captain. And he has always wanted to live around here and, you know, I guess experience more boating around here. So he found the property and he was the one who brought it to my attention. And as far as how do we decide on 42 units, I mean, a lot of it's a function of the site plan, the style of unit we wanted to build, obviously, and then, of course, meeting with the health department and the water department on what could the property support, your own ordinances, and like I said, we spent a lot of time trying to figure out what the density could be. We had plans with 48 units on it at one point. We've considered plans with less. Obviously, every developer, 42 is better than 41, but there's a certain point where it's too full. So we wanted to maintain a balance of open space, good views for most of the people. Like I said, it's kind of set back from the front. We didn't want to jam units up close to the road, and we wanted to have enough room for significant boat storage and a common gathering area for the owners. So it's kind of balancing all those things. We ended up at these particular unit number and building sizes.
Then you had in the write-up here somewhere that you thought that the predominant buyer would be more a retired person?
Well, we don't really know. Anybody who is interested obviously could buy one. We're not particularly going to be targeting or marketing to a retired person. Doesn't have to be at all. A lot of it would depend on the price, the final prices that we have.
It just seemed like that you had some, let's say you, I don't mean it necessarily you personally, but the group, that there was a sentence in here about did not expect residents to be families with school-aged children, and so expect no significant impact on the school district. I would just, so that, to me, when I read those couple of sentences within that, and there was one there about the retired, that you had a particular vision of what type of person would be buying this. Obviously, the boat storage, they'd be paying a premium, I would assume, to get that. And I mean, just trying to get a sense for how that came about.
The idea, the boat storage would be part of the price of a unit. It would be all built right in. So if you buy a unit, you get your boat storage automatically. As far, again, as what the potential buyer would be, I'm thinking of my partner who's 60 years old and he's a part-time Florida, part-time Michigan resident, longtime boater. Maybe his age was what made us think of semi-retired people, but certainly it wouldn't have to be. I mean, what do you, I guess, like I said in the beginning, input from you all is very valuable. How would you see buyers of this community be?
I have a question on that too.
If we could,
Do you hear me?
we don't have it opened up for public comment at this point. Questions from the commission?
I was just going to say that was one thing that I thought Bill made a good point about making sure that if it doesn't end up being a cute little old couple living in it, that we've got the potential for, maybe 7 kids. I mean, you can shove a lot of kids into a small space if you have to. So who knows, just to make sure that the septic and everything can handle them.
Absolutely. We have to, every T has to be crossed, every I has to be dotted before we could get approval on that. And that would come from all the other agencies before we could be allowed to build. Yeah, I don't know. I know exactly what you're saying. I got 6 brothers and sisters. We lived in a 1,300 square foot house when I was growing up, and we had 1 bathroom.
Right.
So they don't really know who's going to occupy it. You're right. It would be average out, I guess, when they make those rules. I don't really know this, but I'm imagining that they know that could be occupied by anywhere from 1 to 6 people. And they take an average of that average of the population per unit, and then the health department tells us, here's how many it would support, and here's how you have to build your septic system. And it would be redundant. There would have to be, alarms in case there's a failure. We do have to have a full-size, whole separate reserve field. Although they've told us with the quality of the soils here, it's very likely that reserve field would never, ever come into play. But so what? We have to build it, we build it.
What is your target range for price per unit?
That's still a bit up in the air too. We're thinking probably in the low 3s to as high as anybody wanted to take it. And of course, I mentioned an elevator earlier, that adds some significant cost. But initially, we're thinking maybe low to mid 300s.
So if you've looked at less density, what's the bottom line, I guess? What?
That's another one that's hard to say because less density, like the other question, depending on the price of the unit, $1 million house versus $100,000 houses. So it's a balance of what we can make look great on the site, more so than the value of maximizing every dollar. I mean, the developments that I've built in the past, every developer says this, so, it's not just a function of the dollars. We have to sell the product. It has to be attractive to people, obviously. So if it's all just jammed in there and too crowded, looks like New York City, nobody's going to want it. So, what's the bottom line? I can't even tell you that answer at all. It's kind of still in flux too much depending on the price. I mean, certainly 10 units isn't going to entice us to build a property, We are not, it's not 42 or nothing, I can tell you that. I mean, we're very open to revisions on the thing, different densities, different units. I would like to have different units, different sizes to appeal to a whole range of potential clients. They could double up units. We could start with a 1,200 square foot unit. Somebody could double it up and make a 2,400 square foot unit if they wanted to. And then it would be less units in effect, but the same size, same physical mass on the site. So that's something we did in one of the properties down in Milford. We combined a couple.
I guess looking at the site plan and the 42 units, you mentioned you were planning on having an additional 12 parking spaces. And I'm not seeing where that would happen.
No, because you're right. There's room on the site to put them in many different places, visitor spaces. Oh, I didn't even mention. Regarding parking, every single unit, the design of it is intended to have either a 1 or a 2-car garage right on the very lowest level on the first floor with the living spaces above. Or no, well, they wouldn't have none because I think your parking ordinances, we have to have 2 spaces per unit. We would like to have 2 spaces per unit, even if that's not the requirement. So each unit would have a garage. You could drive right in, either 1 car deep or 2 cars deep, in addition to its own individual dedicated parking space in front of that garage. So depending on your style of your garage, you could have 2 or 3 places just for yourself. And in addition to that, on the whole property was where the other 12 spaces came in. And where we're going to put them, we don't really know. It's going to depend on the grading, the vegetation. But we had a couple different sketches where we easily fit 12 more spaces in there.
Okay. That sounds like a lot of cars for 42 units, and I'm not sure that 2 cars per unit is quite the right assumption.
It's, again, there's a minimum standard we'd have to meet, and then, again,
Just a
that
thought.
would be up to the buyers at that point, if they wanted the garage and how big. In any case, only 1 would be parked out front if you had to, and you would have to park your cars in the garage because there's no other space for that owner to park his car. Maybe I didn't say it, the 12 spaces are intended to be for visitors.
Right. Yeah, there's not a lot of other space in that area to park. It's pretty busy.
Well, my first reaction in looking at it was it just seemed incredibly dense as far as the number of units granted, they're decent sized units for a townhome, but it seemed incredibly dense because we don't really have anything like this remotely this dense at this scale anywhere in the township. And I was kind of looking at the aerial map, and then I went on Google and I was just looking at it, kind of zooming out on Google, how you can look at the Google Maps and you look at the different homes and you look at the people's yards and stuff and you see, if you try to count up 42 homes, you go quite a range away from this before you get close to that density. And everybody's got yards and it's just a totally different feel from what you're proposing here. And that's where I struggle. It's, it just seems way different, way denser, way, and I'm not critiquing, I haven't seen your place in Milford or whatever. It could be the most beautiful townhome community in that whole area. But it's just, this isn't Milford. This is Eastport, Michigan. It's a much different setting. So that's what, for me, looking at this, that's where I struggle with the most.
Understand? The master plan, that's a intentionally, I don't know what the word I should use, not exact. There's no hard and fast rules in the master plan. It does preserve the rural character of the township. However, it also says encourage a mix of different types of uses, commercial, industrial, residential, including multifamily uses. And what you just said, when you zoom out in the township, there's nothing like this. That could be considered a plus. Now you have some. It's easy for me to say, I understand, but that in some people's eyes, not just mine, I think could be a positive thing.
Okay, so help me. I'm not a builder and I just know computers. So when I
Help on the presentation.
if I look at the pictures and they just seem really tall. So what would be the height of one of these buildings?
It's limited by your ordinances. I think it's a maximum of 41 feet.
Yeah,
Peak of
okay.
roof, so that's all it could be.
So you want to go up to that 41 feet potentially?
It was about 38. I think the plans, we were looking at it first, but pretty close, yes. In
So
order to
like
get the parking on the first floor
okay.
and a couple of floors of living to get a decent sized home. And plus, our intention is to have some kind of rooftop decking, if possible, on as many units, again, as an option for the residents. I believe when you get up to that height, we might be able to see the bay looking west.
Okay,
Which I
party.
thought would be pretty
Party,
nice for
yeah.
the owners.
Thank you.
But we can't go any higher. We do not intend on asking for any height variances.
Gotcha. And then I think for me, the traffic was a big thing, like knowing, I don't get out much. I'm from my computer, but when I do, being at that corner, man, oh man, I just can't imagine being someone that lives there and has to hit that intersection every day. I would be definitely concerned about that for the inconvenience and safety.
It's already a busy intersection, and
Yeah,
especially with boats and
yeah,
campers
and the curve there, yeah.
and going straight across to try to get to the lake. And there's
Yeah.
also a lot, currently they park boat trailers up and down 88 in peak months, and all we're doing is adding potentially 42 more boats. So
Right.
Just another
Yeah.
traffic concern there, I think.
Is that a permitted thing? You park the boat trailer on?
I don't know the answer to that. I'm not going to speak for the sheriff, but it's quite busy in peak summer.
Again, I'm no traffic engineer either, but the ones we have and that we've talked to is the Torch Lake Cafe is 5 times the traffic that these would generate on meal times. So I don't, it would have to be documented better, more than the preliminary work we've done, of course. But again, from our perspective, the preliminary stuff we have done indicates that this is the capacity of the intersection, the roads, the construction of the roads are all more than adequate to handle this number of units. But again, that'll come out from the engineer's report. You don't have to take my word for it.
Yeah, I would like to add to that, the traffic and if you go forward with this, I want some really concrete documentation because I've worked with MDOT. I don't know who you're talking to with MDOT, but that corner is a concern of theirs. I'm not saying you're not being honest with what the information you have, but I really would need some actual documentation on this.
We expect it. We fully expect to have to learn that more ourselves. And I should clarify, I'm not the one talking to MDOT. It's our civil engineering firm. But yes, this is something we've done in the past too. A couple of developments we built, we've had to widen roads. It's no stranger. I'm not saying we want to, but I've been through those steps and I understand what you're saying. We would provide.
And if this is also, you're promoting this as a boating enclave community, dovetail with what you're saying. We're kind of taxed with our two launches right now in terms of parking space, in terms of usage, daily usage, especially on the weekends. And I think you need to do more research and really have some evidence that this is really doable without changing our community in a very significant way. I think when I first looked at this, my first thought, and I'm just going to be honest, is this is an aggressive community that you're proposing and for the planning commission. I think we really need to be serious about this because this could set precedent. I mean, there's interest in our township. And we have to be very, very careful how we go forward with this. So I just want you to know, we're going to be really, really careful on our steps forward because, we do have land that could be used and we need to be very particular on how we're using it. So
Appreciate the info.
Mike, in reference to the plan, the bioswales, is that your collection area for the parking of pavement downspouts? Am I reading that correctly?
Yes, that's intended to be, although again, I'm being told with the soils, there could never be an accumulation of water on the surface on this property. But that's what those are intended to be.
Okay,
Planted, graded, vegetation-wise to be able to absorb stormwater.
right. And I think it's fair to say as we live around here, even though we have great soils for sand, et cetera, when you have a 4-inch rain, it doesn't absorb it quite as fast.
Agreed.
Which doesn't happen all the
There are
time,
washouts,
but I know
yes.
what you're saying. Okay, thank you very much.
But yes, the stormwater has to be handled like any modern development, collected, dispersed and dealt with in a way that doesn't cause erosion or flooding. And certainly no additional drainage onto neighboring properties. Everything on our property stays on our property.
If you were to move ahead, if you did get approval on something and you were to build, did you envision building all 42 units fairly quickly, or did you build them, a fourth of them, and let them all sell and then do another fourth? And how would you envision that?
Probably in increments. I doubt that we would build 42 at a time. A lot of it is sales, obviously sales driven. With this type of condominium buildings and financing, you can take a building, and I think it's 25%. If 8-unit building, if we have 2 that are sold, we could build that 8-unit building. So that would be building by building, I guess is probably the best way to say it. And no idea which building would go first, whether it be a 4 or 6 or an 8-unit building.
So maybe coming back to the intended customer use, if you will. You mentioned that you'd file a condominium plan. Would that include restrictions on short-term rentals or?
Well, I am under the impression that in Torch Lake Township, there are no short-term rentals currently permitted anyways. So I don't think that's even an option for us.
That is correct.
Yeah, so it wouldn't be, as far as in probably the master deed bylaws documents would probably state that the property has to follow whatever the township ordinances are. So I guess in the future, 20 years, 10 years, something happens where the moratorium on short-term rentals is lifted, that could be used for that. But right now we can't. So we're not intending to push that at all.
And then what about the boat storage? Would that would be only for residents, I think you mentioned?
Yes, that's the current thought. That building is intended not only for boat storage, but like I said, as maybe some kind of common lounge or gathering area for the residents to hang out together. It's not that huge to be able to put that many boats in it. In fact, depending on the size of the boats, I'm not even sure we could get 42 of them in there.
Right.
But it would only be for the residents of the community, yes.
So no outside leasing. And Would they do winter storage in there as well? And
Probably, yes, they would. You're talking about shrink wrap, the winterize the boat and yes.
Other questions from the commission?
Not a question, but just a comment. I would encourage you to definitely exceed our expectations for the landscaping.
Okay. That's a good one.
Native plants, please.
I think my kind of summary comments would be that, as I mentioned, and you heard Denise and a few others comment about, my biggest struggle is just looking at this in comparison as a development project in comparison to other things that you see around. And I get your point. Yeah, there isn't nothing like this. That is true. But there's also nothing like this because, it's not like you're proposing something incrementally that changes the township over time. You're proposing something that is drastically different. I mean, even the height, granted, you're staying within the ordinance, but you're talking 4 structures, multiple units per each that are pretty sizable buildings right packed into an area. So I think from a just kind of impact to the community, not just with the traffic and whether or not it's all retirees or people with children or all those things are up in the air, I get that. But it's just a major impact to the community. So something we'll have to very much be aware of and thoughtful about as we consider anything going in there in that regard.
If I may, again, the ordinance, the zoning rules are very, very broad as far as what technically is permitted in village zoning business. If I could ask you all, like, what would be your main criteria for evaluating this? I'm not, obviously tonight's not an approval or denial meeting, and I've heard, I made some notes about obviously things that are of concern to you. Physical design of the structures, is density truly a limiting thing, and how do you determine, how would you determine, for instance, back to the density question, what would be, could be, should be the allowable density on 5.5 acres? I mean, how do you determine that? Given the absence of any rules in the ordinances.
Yeah, and those are fair questions. Don't for one second. I can appreciate why you would be asking those questions. If I were you, I would as well. And I think from our standpoint, it's a tricky question because, it depends, and that's indeed why we have this kind of a process in the first place, is to try to come up and meet somewhere that works for you as a developer and works for the community as a community. And so, it's difficult for us to say because, it's just, I can tell you that from my perspective, the 42 is way too high.
I think that's fair.
Yeah, and it's, and just, again, I get by I was looking at, different ways of thinking about it, trying to get at the question you're asking. So, I think as a commission, we are in the process of going through revisions in our ordinance as we speak. After we're done with your discussion here, we're going to be talking about other chapters of a proposed ordinance, and it's to address things like this and how do we tackle these things. So, I guess I would just say that it's difficult for us to just say, 42 is too much, but X is fine. It's not a clear deal because it depends on the location, it depends on the types of units, it depends on other aspects that you're putting into it, in this case, the boat storage. I'm not saying any one of these things are a pro or a con, I'm just stating that they're specific circumstances for your application. Yeah, so I guess I'll just kind of summarize with that unless somebody else wants to chime in on it.
yeah, I think I agree obviously with all of that. And I think it's also important who it's being marketed to or what the use is going to be. Very different if we've got people there in the peak summer times, additional 50 people in Eastport hardly be noticed. But if it's going to be year-round residents, it's going to be a little different, different activity in that area, I guess, than we're used to. And also, the traffic I have a real concern about. Such a busy area, such a busy intersection, and there's no there's no easy way to get in and out of there except right through that intersection with 31.
Other questions or comments?
Yeah, Mike, I'd like to go back to your plan again. Your proposed, like your build out with this, I see the main entrance coming in, you have an entrance going to your boat storage as such. As a developer, would you start at the front, obviously, and work your way back, or do you put all your infrastructure in? And I guess I'm trying to think when you're thinking of how many units is it going to take to keep you going? And which is an unknown
You mean in the plan in general?
in the plan in general.
Right, right, which is a bit of an unknown still, yes.
Right, but you would, as a developer, just, I don't know this answer, but do you start at front, work your way back, or is there a motive to the madness of developing something like this and where you create to start?
Okay, so a couple things. Before we can occupy a first unit, the well system and the septic system have to be built and functioning and approved. So those would have to be built. So the whole front area where the septic system is would be done. Generally, to develop and build, to minimize, it's hard with just the one entrance. We had a couple different plans. There was one plan, in fact, which still could happen. On the backside of the boat building, could have another driveway connecting back in there. And then we could have open doors. You could actually drive through the boat storage to get it out if you had to in a pinch. But back to your question about where do we start? Generally, I prefer to go from the back to the front. You finish a back unit, somebody's living there, and you don't have construction vehicles driving past them every day. So they have to pass the construction out front to get in and out, but that's up to them. They're not inconvenienced all day long with other. So I guess that'd be the two main things. The water and sewer has to be done, infrastructure has to be done, the roads have to be built, and then we would start from the back probably.
Okay, which leads to the second part of a question here is, I think you need another egress area.
That's a possibility too, in the past, and I think the rules would be the same here with the traffic guys, with the boulevard entrance. Technically, that gives you, like if somebody has a breakdown, you still can get your emergency vehicles in and out. I personally still prefer the other one, but that's still unknown. But I
Okay,
hear what you're saying, yes.
okay, thanks.
Sir, what's the population of Torch Lake Township right now? Is it like 1,700?
Random trivia.
12?
I think, yeah.
1,200?
Anecdotal, but I
According
think-
to the internet,
Oh, that's got to be
it's
right.
about 1,200
Okay.
that was 2018.
So that's, we're talking like this one development with 80 residents is like 7% of our population like that in one little spot. That's just, I'm not saying that's right or wrong. I'm not saying but it's just something that we have to think about, the implications of that. Not
Well-
just for this development, but for the future, as Denise had pointed out.
Well, and to put it into context, I heard the residents in Eastport is 50. I mean, that might be wrong, but it's close.
We can count.
We can count them, right? So, when you think of increasing it by that much all at once, or close to all at once, but I thought of another question for you to think as a developer, for you to think what your bottom line is. I mean, what do you have to do in order to make this investment worth your
Of course.
investment? Because, I mean, if, you need to be really clear about that.
I don't know what that answer is. Obviously, we have to know that, otherwise we're not going to purchase a property and come back to you all with a site plan.
Right.
But it's absolutely on our minds, of course.
Would say I appreciate your openness and candor tonight. Difficult questions, difficult challenges for both parties. I get that. So I do appreciate your sincerity.
And likewise, and this is not something we're expecting to come back in one meeting and have an approval. We know there's a public hearing, we know it's a special use permit. There could be 2 or 3 meetings, there could be special meetings for some of these other questions that have come up. So we're very much open, willing to work and take all the input we can get.
So any other comments, questions?
Did we get an answer to number 9? Did we ask that? I I might have missed it, but I don't think I did.
Yeah. The last question for Mr. Dvorak was, would there be a homeowners association with the development?
A what?
A homeowners association?
There would be, yes, there would be a condominium owners association, yes.
So unless there's any other burning questions, I think we're going to move to close this part of the meeting this evening.
Thank you.
So, thank you very much for your time tonight. So Sarah, I think we move on now to the zoning ordinance review, Article 6. Before we do that, though, is there anything we should hit upon with prior, any kind of summaries or anything else that we need to talk about before we dive into section 6?
I don't think so. I mean, the planning commission, so I took a look through and I wrote this down. The planning commission's reviewed chapters 1 through 5, and then we kind of have 6 through 9 tonight. Left over are 10, 12, and 14 in the future. So we're getting close here to finishing the review of this draft zoning ordinance. And I haven't done any of the, I haven't provided you with an updated draft. This is the same draft from last October that we've been working through. So once we get through all of the review and information, then I'll get you a updated draft for a quick review before we move forward with the adoption process on the ordinance. So, and if I could just, if you'd like to talk, you can go out in the hallway, but it's distracting when you're talking in the audience when we're up here participating in our meeting. So Article 6, I know we talked about solar and wind last month, so those are, we don't have to worry about that. Is there anything else in Article 6 that you'd like to discuss further? So these are supplemental use standards, so your uses are up in Article 3, and then we will reference certain sections to these uses if these uses need additional information or requirements for it.
Sarah, we're just going to pause just for a second until the commotion stops for a second. There will be.
I think people don't realize that they still can't public.
They can make comments afterwards, yes.
I don't think they know that. So I think that's where there's.
The public comment at the very end.
I think there's more than. You might wanna.
Yes, there is a time at the agenda later for public comments, and they can comment on anything. Spelled out in the agenda later, they can comment on anything. Great.
So any comments on any of the uses in Article 6? A lot of these were pulled out of your current ordinance. There were some changes based either on best practices or case law.
I just had noted something about the airport and doing an overlay. Did we address that anywhere?
No, we got to go back. We have to do the master plan first before we do
Okay.
that in the ordinance.
So Sarah had a question. So just start going through it, right?
Mm-hmm.
In section 6.3, maybe it's mentioned later, but I guess never mind. I think I answered my own question.
Okay.
Okay, now I found it. Accessory dwelling units. So this has been a fairly discussed topic in the community. I believe it's come up on several different times. And so I think in the classic sense, we think of it in terms of like a carriage house. It's a good example. Those are out there. So like in here, you've had the minimum size of 300 square feet and the maximum of 800. I know those are just guidelines to put out there for discussion. What did, how did you come up with those, and what was what was your thinking behind those numbers?
Those numbers are kind of guidance for the planning commission. So currently, the ordinance has a definition for a carriage house. It doesn't actually allow a carriage house as a use allowed. There's some language about accessory buildings, but I know historically, carriage houses have been allowed as accessory dwelling units as long as they're smaller than the house, like an accessory use. And they're supposed to be above the garage. But the ordinance doesn't actually say any of that. So this is an attempt to put in some regulations to allow something similar to what has been done historically.
Gotcha.
You can adjust any of these. I think the minimum size of 300 square feet is pretty small to live in, especially long-term. But it can work. 800 square feet typically is somewhere in that ballpark, 800 to 1,000 square feet for your accessory dwelling unit, to try to keep it smaller than your primary house. So it is an accessory use to the property. You could limit it to the size of the principal dwelling unit. I mean, here we say whichever is less for that, but usually there is a high end, and it's right around 800 to 1,000 square feet for that dwelling unit.
Yeah, and I guess, there are some large, I'll call them carriage houses in the community that I've seen, and, there's large residents, and they've got a large carriage house, and they have lots of guests, and, it doesn't seem unreasonable, because as long as it's not a little bitty place in a gigantic secondary dwelling that sits next to the road or something, it doesn't seem like it's unreasonable. Any thoughts from the commission on this?
So that would
experience?
require a special use permit if they were going to be larger or smaller than that? Is that?
Nope, it would just be, so the accessory dwelling units are allowed just with a land use permit. So you can just come into the office and get it from the zoning administrator. But according to this, it would not be able to be larger than 800 square feet or the size of the house, whichever is less. We don't have very many houses that are less than 800 square feet, but if you get into that where you have a smaller house.
Yeah, right now it's a minimum of 900,
My 960, yeah.
so this is very different.
Mm-hmm.
I
So,
like this better.
I like the way it's worded. My only thing was on the size. And I know we would have quite a number of those types of carriage houses that would be outside of these things right now. And I don't think that they have detracted. So it was really that upper end. I was almost thinking in terms of either a much larger minimum square feet on the 800, or making it that it's got to be at least, no larger than the primary, something like that. Because that's what's currently in it. Can't be any
There's
larger
no
than-
language. I mean,
Well,
that's
size
just
at all.
been a interpretation
Oh.
by former zoning administrators.
Just that minimum.
Just the minimum. Okay.
Yeah, I mean, whatever you're comfortable with for that size. I mean, I can see that if you already have a lot of them that are larger than 800, if you don't have concern about the size of them, it will add hopefully some to our housing stock. I know a lot of people use them because we're a lake community for family in the summertime, but also if there's opportunity in either maybe the off season to rent more long-term, or potentially allow somebody to put up accessory dwelling unit to provide as permanent housing for someone,
Everyone's parents are getting older.
right?
What do others think about it?
And I know you just asked that question. I just want to be clear too, that, and this kind of talks about it, but This could be a dwelling unit that you think of traditionally as being above your garage, but it could be on the back of the garage. It could be a small apartment that's attached to the main house. It could be converting a basement into that second dwelling, or, an attic area or something like that. Essentially, adding a dwelling in some shape or form. So I just don't want you to get too pinned into thinking, oh, it's only going to be in a detached garage. It could even be an attached garage that has living above it, but it's not connected to the main house.
And it
So-
can be a completely separate structure altogether,
Right. So just to think about it kind of in that way, that it could be in lots of different forms and look differently.
So what do other commission members feel about the 800 number? My point being that it's very restrictive. Let me back up. I like the way this is set up. My only concern is around the 800 number, because I know there's a lot of accessory buildings out there that are significantly larger, and they're custom, and they're part of a very large kind of estate type property, and it feels like we're unduly restricting that when we don't necessarily have to.
I would agree with you. They're done very well, and they don't seem large in comparison to what.
Is there? Yeah.
Right,
Yeah.
Right, that's.
Could it be in relationship to lot size? I mean, could there be some kind of a ratio? I don't know what your experience with that is, but
It could be, let me take a look at something really quick in Article 3.
I'm with you in that I wouldn't limit it to the 800. I personally don't care if they're even larger than the main house, be fancy, whatever. But I understand that there was a lot of other people that do care about them being larger. So I would say, yeah, not any larger than the main dwelling, then everyone would be happy.
So we do have maximum lot coverage and impervious coverage in this ordinance. So you've got the 30% for lot coverage. So that would help to limit the size. I mean, 30% of your lot is still a lot of coverage.
It's a lot of coverage. Yeah.
But
Big.
that, if you have a very small lot, you may run up against that if you're adding on the garage or an accessory dwelling.
But in terms of the size of the building, what they put inside that as an accessory dwelling to have it, you can,
Yeah, I
as
mean.
a slash carriage house, it's more of, I guess, the size of the building that we're talking about on the lot versus what's actually inside it that we don't see.
So what I would propose for H is that, and I think this covers everybody here, maximum size shall not exceed the size of the principal dwelling unit, whichever, I guess it just should not exceed that. And then
Right.
you'd have the 30% thing, that if you've got a tiny, tiny lot, and two giant structures, they can't together, would not be able to exceed that 30%.
That seems like the concern, right?
Yeah.
Overtaking your property, or
Mhm.
Yeah.
being a nuisance. I mean, to some degree, I'd say the same on the low end. I mean, there's a point at which
Right.
to fit all in, you need a certain amount of space, but I don't know that 300 is a magic number.
And I mean, you could take out the low end too, if you wanted to. Somebody's gonna build what they build. Like I said, 300's pretty small to do that and still meet building code requirements and get everything in there.
Exactly.
I don't think you're gonna run up against that as being too small, but.
I don't have an issue with getting rid of the small size of it either. You get those little bitty, what do you call those little miniature home things? If somebody wants to put one in
The
their yard and it's well
micro
done.
That's what I was thinking about
Yeah.
in terms of that.
Yeah.
No reason to restrict them.
Okay. Any other questions on ADUs or anything prior to that?
Does it, still on ADUs, restrict or include something like a travel trailer?
They're treated differently and they're in Article 2.
Because they have wheels.
Yeah, we're
Okay.
treating them as like
Sorry,
a
I haven't-
recreational vehicle.
Trying to catch up.
It's good
Yeah,
questions.
no problem.
it's-
So when we do
that too
limit
is a
those,
subject that's come up quite a bit.
yeah,
Yeah.
there's certain regulations on that, and we have changed them from what's in that draft too for the amount of time, and you have to have a permit and things like that. So I think it's 30 days in a calendar year, you'd have to get a permit, and you can use it as a dwelling.
Okay.
I think is what we settled on.
I just had, moving on to 6.4. For, it says under 6.4C occupancy, agricultural employee housing should be occupied by agricultural employees. How do we enforce any of this?
That would be related to if we received a complaint, then we'd follow up on it, or if somebody was advertising that, say, as some sort of a rental or something like that, we would have the language in here that would say you're limited to doing that. So typically what we do when we issue the land use permit, we would write on the bottom, a condition is this is agricultural housing only, to only be used for your employees. So it's already noted once when we issue the permit, but then if there's ever any question about it or anything like that, we can come back to this section.
Is this the same as the current?
Yes, this comes out of the current one.
Cool.
The agricultural tourism, this is new language for you. It doesn't go too far down, but we can always, if you want to, get into more details about the ag tourism component. But it may be something we'd want to circle back to after the master plan. This is because we're kind of doing a, reorganization and things like that. We don't want to go too far.
Yep. Because the lot size has to be minimum of 10 acres. So if we're going, I think that might be something we'd want to revisit.
For which one?
Agricultural tourism,
Oh,
because I know with some of the new very specific farming, they're going down to 5 acres. I don't know. I think that might be something we want to look into, the minimum of 10 acres.
I'm glad it's in there.
what did we have? This is new, you're saying, right?
Correct.
Yeah. Okay. So Denise, what, were you proposing a smaller lot size then, or?
Well, I think when we get to our master plan, that we might want to look at the farm land usage, because there are some real particular kinds of farming now that is less than 10 acres. And if we want to promote that as in our township, I think we could look at the minimum.
Maybe I'm missing something. Can we change it now to even cut it in half? for now? Because 10 acres is there a reason to have it at 10?
I think
Sarah?
10 is just a comfortable number to, if you're starting putting commercial on it.
I see.
But it would be whatever you'd like to do. Generally, when you start talking about like agricultural, commercial enterprises, you can spend a lot of time talking about it, because what does that mean? What uses are included? There's kind of this fine line between supporting your agricultural property owners and farmers and somebody exploiting that to put something in a residential district or an ag district that's actually a commercial operation. So I think that there's this delicate dance that you have to walk, and how it's approved and what happens. For the planning commission in the community to have a discussion about. Sometimes it's not as big of a concern. I think, there's quite a few farm markets in this area right on 31. That's kind of just a normal operation that you see, versus there's some other agricultural properties in different communities where somebody's doing farm to table, growing and having a restaurant in the ag district, and it becomes essentially a restaurant in your ag district. Granted, they are serving food that's there, but they may have more turnover than you have at the Torchlight Cafe in your ag district. So usually that conversation just usually spirals into snowballs into a whole nother situation once you start going down there.
Well, for now, do you want to keep it at 10 or you want to change it?
I'm comfortable leaving it at 10. I just,
Okay.
As we
Think about it for
go
future.
through our,
I think
master
so.
plan.
When you're talking about commercial operation on the site too, and 50% has to be farming, and then when you get down to 5 acres, you don't have much room for a building and parking.
Yeah.
Yeah. Any questions on the 6.6 or comments? 6.7?
I'm wondering about 6.7.
Yeah.
Is this new?
Let me see. I believe so. Let me double check though. I don't think our current ordinance talks that much about campgrounds,
Okay.
but yeah, there's currently no supplemental uses for campgrounds. They're allowed in the commercial zoning district and the current ordinance, and in the draft campgrounds. Are allowed in the commercial district as a special use permit. So any existing campgrounds would, either be non-conforming or comply with it, depending on the situation. So this would apply to any new campgrounds that would come in.
And I hadn't noted that we put suggested that we put in minimum sizes because commercial land, like the airport, could put in a campground.
Yeah, so some of this has, the minimum lot size and lot width, and then having the screening from your neighboring property, that would be, I'm gonna call it an improvement. That's my words for it. And then also having the road minimum size, because we don't have anything, they're usually interior. A lot of times they're even smaller than that, and it just makes it difficult for traffic and for fire and emergency services to get through a campground. And then having the campsites vacant from November through April. This typically is something that you run into when somebody's doing more of a RV park, where somebody rents for a whole season one spot, and then say they want to come back there next year. Potentially the campground would allow them to store their camper on their lot since they're coming back and reserved it for the next year. So we don't want it to turn into a outdoor storage facility for campers. in the off season. So that's where that language kind of comes in there. And these are all things that I've experienced in reviewing campgrounds that recently. I know that there's been some struggle over in Leelanau, I think it was Leelanau Township. In Leelanau County, I think they still have outstanding lawsuit related to a campground over there. Theirs was more that RV seasonal use situation, which for some reason that seems to be the going, well, because of housing, I guess. You know, you can pull your RV or your camper in for the whole summer, live in northern Michigan, enjoy, you know, the seasons, and then head to Florida or Arizona for your winter season for that.
Let me just play something back real quick. So in the current ordinance, campgrounds are allowed on commercial through a special use permit.
Correct.
But there's no guidelines in the ordinance
Right.
around.
No minimum
It's
lot
just
size, no.
Somebody says, I want to open up a campground, we'd be sitting here trying to think through. So what this does here is we would be the same deal. It'd be commercial, special use permit, but we'd have these guidelines to start
Correct.
working with. Okay.
So the only place these can be is in commercial district.
Correct.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah, and so these are kind of above and beyond. Currently, you would look at your special use standards in your ordinance and see if it meets those standards or doesn't meet those standards. So the same would be true if someone new came in with campground, they still have to meet those special use standards. But this is, yeah, kind of setting up some minimums for them outside of that. So I don't want to be too over-regulating on it, but also try to set a little bit of guidance maybe for an
Yeah.
applicant to say these are our minimums.
I'd say the only thing is, two things pop out from a numbers perspective. I think the 10 acres seems reasonable. But the 50 feet from property lines, could we push that up a little bit? It just feels like if you got a house and you're next to a commercial property, somebody wants to put a campsite, from your property line, 50 feet, there could be a line of campers right there drinking up a storm and having campfires, and you're done. You're stuck next to it.
I mean, you like 100
Make it 100
feet?
feet. Then maybe 150 feet for the sanitary to give them a little bit, so the bathroom's not right on your property line, it feels like.
Okay.
That would be the only thing. I mean, again, I'm not trying to be overly restrictive on it. On the other hand, I'm trying to be sensitive to the people that border it.
Correct.
I guess that's why we wouldn't have a minimum site size, right?
Right.
Just that's unnecessary level of restriction.
Yeah. There might even be are there any state laws around that?
I'm sorry.
Around minimum campground site sizes?
The state has a minimum site size. I believe it's 200 square feet. And I believe it's 20 foot wide, but I may be off a little bit.
Any other questions on campsites? No, we should probably. Automobile, I just had one question on automobiles. Is it defined in
Yeah.
it's major and minor? Is it defined somewhere?
It should be.
Probably.
Let me look and see. One of them is usually like a minor's typically like an oil change place, batteries, something that you would, I'm gonna say typically would have seen next to a gas station. But you do have some gas stations that have major that are doing, motor work and things like that. So, automobile, minors, replacement of part or repair that does not require removal of the engine head or pan, transmission, differential, incidental body work, fender work, minor painting, or upholstery service. Not to exceed 7,000 pounds gross weight. And then majors, general repair, rebuilding, reconditionings of engines, so everything else. dismantling, body work.
Like my son has in our garage right now in his car.
Correct.
That'd be
Yes.
major.
Yes.
Spread it all over the garage.
Did I make you read this?
Mhm.
And these are all distinct from automobile service stations.
Correct. Automobile service stations would be your gas station.
Anything else on these sections, 6.7, 6.8? If not, we'll just keep going. Sarah, I would just comment that in general, I mean, the thing reads quite well.
Good.
I mean, it's not exactly something I'd like to read for good kind of reading, but
I mean, try to move everything to one spot, same regulations for all districts. And then if you amend it in one district, you don't have to worry about if you amend it in all the districts. Because currently, a lot of the regulations are in each individual district. So it just is prime opportunity for inconsistencies.
612 and 613, I know we had talked about combining them because they were so similar.
So the intent was to be different. Because the cottage industries have more employees, but we could combine probably. I can actually look at cottage industries, home-based business, and home occupations and see if some of the standards are the same, and then maybe do some subheadings for any of them that are different, just to reorganize it a little bit. These are kind of hard ones because the definitions have to be clear so that we know when we get dump from home occupation to home-based business to cottage industry. And I don't know the history at the planning commission and the township level between all three of them. I mean, cottage industries is very specific and unique to Torch Lake Township versus any other zoning ordinance that I've seen. So I'm assuming, my assumption is there was a big discussion at one time, something happened, and that's how this regulation came to be, but I don't have that history.
Yeah, the 13 and 14 seem very similar.
anything that should be changed in 16 or 613 or 14? Then, do we want to try to combine them? Do we leave them as they are?
I'll see if there's a way to kind of combine them together.
Okay.
Do you know, is there an example of a cottage industry and for reference in Torch Lake Township?
I don't know. We had somebody that at one time had kind of been interested in getting an approval. Do you know anybody that's not gone through the cottage industry process? Or do you remember anybody?
There's not been no one in the last 2 years.
Right,
Actually before that,
yeah.
no.
And it's taking minutes. You don't remember anybody coming in?
Nope.
Okay. Nope, sorry.
Yeah, I would go for simplifying, putting those two together. That would be.
Okay, so Sarah's going to try and streamline it a bit.
Yeah.
615, outdoor sales and displays. It's not directly related to this, but since we've had the new sign ordinance, has there been any feedback or questions, or has it proved helpful? Anything that's come up in the community since that happened?
I think we've had one sign permit since we've put that in. It was in the ag district for an ag business. Other than that, I haven't heard too much about it. Jackie would usually be receiving those phone calls. Anything related to the sign amendment since we put it in?
We have one, we just did one.
Yeah.
Couples and. we have combinations, but
Okay. Okay, if nothing, 616, 617.
Six seventeen. Noted that we should look at this.
Okay, I'm looking. What do we have currently?
We have, let's see. No details. They are allowed by zoning administrator's approval in your commercial district. And special use in your village business district.
Is that what we're proposing here?
Um, Hotels by right in the commercial and special use in the village business. So the same.
Same, okay.
Mhm.
It's going to seem like an off question, but when I think of parts of more of an urban setting and you get a lot of hotels or motels lined up, and there's just a lot of kind of transients in and out. I'm looking at these, and these guidelines here seem reasonable, kind of consistent with the motel that's right up the road here. Is there any kind of something we could put in there about, well, never mind, just leave it. I'm just going to withdraw the question. It goes nowhere. Nowhere good, let's put it that way. Any comments on 618? $619 golf courses?
If we go back to motels and hotels, does anyone have any concerns about any ginormous hotels? I don't know if I do, but
So can a hotel just go into commercial right now with zoning administrators as long as it meets those criteria? Is that true?
There's no criteria at all in the
None.
current, right? So you could go in remember though, the commercial, there's only a couple of properties, so you're more likely to probably have the activity in the village business area district. But yeah, you could go on any size lot, you could have any density as long as you had your hotel there and the required number of parking. So the setbacks, and then in the
Height
village business, we
restrictions.
do have some landscaping and stuff like that, that would tie into it. But yeah, basically you'd be limited to, height,
2
setbacks, type of situation, versus here, we're saying that you have to have 800 square feet of lot area per guest room. So that's naturally going to increase the lot size based on the number of units that you have in that building.
so like 54 for 1 acre, 54 rooms. Does that work out?
Yeah, 54 rooms on an acre. I mean, granted, they'd still have to meet parking and, all of that too, but
You said this is only commercial, or did you say village business?
village business too.
So I would think that
they're gonna run into, because we don't have any
Yeah.
public water or sewer, they're gonna run into either a private system or have to be small enough to run off of, still a private system,
Should
but not
we-
an engineered private system.
Should we, or could we just make it more open and commercial and more restrictive in village business?
So what did I say in commercial, it's by right, so it is less restrictive, and then special use in village business. So you still have discretion with
Okay.
saying that there may be, not all locations in village business may be appropriate to put in a hotel as a special use.
Well done,
You have that
Sarah.
discretion.
Well done.
Okay.
I mean, I don't know if that goes to the conversation that happened tonight about the residential development in that intersection. I mean, village business is any properties in the village. So we're looking at Eastport and Torch Lake that front on 31, M88, and Barnes Park Road. So, I mean, same location as the conversation we just had tonight. But I guess I would argue that most conversations related to the density and traffic and things like that are going to be for the same intersection that we talked about tonight in the future. So I think that that'll be a discussion that we're going to have to talk about when we do the master plan and figure out if there's some threshold that we're okay with, discussion with MDOT, try to figure out what everything looks like for moving that forward, because we're going to consistently hit against that kind of wall, I think.
Again, based on the discussion, I think it's advisable to have some kind of density number, a reference point, right?
So is everybody feeling good about hotels and motels?
Laura?
Yeah, I'm so easygoing. Bring it.
Okay. So moving on. Anything on golf courses? Religious institutions? $620? That's a controversial one. Somebody's got to have a question on that one.
I just love how the intent and purpose is just this big, just,
So this language it comes a lot from case law. That's why you have that big,
Perfect.
huge paragraph at the beginning.
And we did, seems like we maybe discussed this before, that because there's two approaches. One approach is to have it very well spelled out, like you have it here. Another approach is to not have it at all
Correct,
and wait for an application.
right?
And Sarah, it seems like we discussed this, and help me refresh my memory, what you shared that got me comfortable. It's better to have it in here.
We have it as a special use in the commercial district, so there's limited parcels that it actually could go on. I probably should double check to see. You may run into issues with some spacing, so essentially you're zoning it out anyways. You kind of could go either way, honestly, with it. I think it's good to at least have the language in Article 6 in the ordinance if you're not going to allow it in a district, because then if it comes along, you're not starting from square one for regulations. You could potentially be challenged if it is not in your ordinance because you're not allowing that use. You're required to allow, all the uses, or at least in the area, have those uses available. The other side of that is that almost half of Antrim County is not zoned. There's a lot of land in the county that someone can go and open this and not have to go to anybody to get permission other than construction code office.
So in that case, having this might be, look, I got to meet with all this.
Right?
yeah, start out with that big, start by reading this,
Okay.
see if you're
I
serious.
mean, B2 sounds to me like you zoned it out based on locations, but
That's what I was thinking. I think because it's 1,000 feet from,
any residence,
that's a really good
school,
point.
religious institution, public park, state licensed childcare facility.
Draw arcs around all those things, and there's not much of an intersection.
Yeah, there's not much left.
yeah, because I don't think our commercial area, I'm going to look at it really quick. is. They're random parcels.
Yeah, I like, that's a really good call out. That pretty much wipes it out.
Yeah, so we may want to pull it out of the commercial district and just leave it in Article 6. And then go back, and if you were to have somebody approach you, we can say, you know, it's not listed in the ordinance. You're welcome to amend the ordinance and add it into a district. They get to pick. Planning commission goes through the process, you know, public hearing, review, all of that to determine the best location for it. Versus putting it in here and then saying it has to be 1,000 feet from residential. All of your commercial properties are all singular properties by themselves. You don't have a commercial district per se that you'd be able to even fit that into.
All right, so I'm confused.
I'm gonna pull it out of Article 3, but leave it in Article 6.
And you're pulling out of Article 3 because why again?
Because I feel like you have a bigger you have a bigger jeopardy of being challenged because you essentially put it in, but then regulated it out, so you're not allowing it versus just not allowing it. Because what'll happen is somebody will come along and say, well, this regulation doesn't work, it's 1,000 feet, and then somehow they'll get that part thrown out and they'll be able to put it, you know, 10 feet from a school. I'd rather have them be able to say to somebody, it's not a use allowed, you're welcome to amend the ordinance and add it in.
Okay, it's getting late. How's everybody doing? I'd like to get through Article 6 at least.
Yeah.
I think you're almost there, right?
Yeah, we're getting there.
I made a
So-
note to put these in alphabetical order. I don't know if it bothers anybody else but me. I think I stopped doing that because then you just keep adding them and subtracting, and then you just continually are reorganizing them. So once we nail down the ones that you need.
Any other comments on, I'll just say, the remaining sections? Article 6.
Yeah, it'll get shorter once we take out wind and solar.
Yep.
Okay.
I have noted 623, PC should determine size and if outdoor should be allowed for the self-storage facilities. If we care to.
Yeah, so as drafted, there's no outdoor storage allowed at a self-storage facility, as this language reads. Some self-storage facilities do allow you to have outdoor storage either out back or right up next to the road, depending on how old they are, things like that, so.
So what was the proposal?
It was no proposal. I just had it noted that we marked that as one that the PC should determine size and if outdoor should be allowed.
Ah, gotcha.
We do have in the current ordinance, what is this in?
She's looking for that. I would say, you know, I can think of a couple of them. They're right pretty close to where I live, where Laura lives. I mean, you can't even, they're put there, there's no outside stuff there, and it's nice and neat. You wouldn't even hardly know they're there. As soon as you do start putting a bunch of boats and stuff out in front, and they get closer to the road, then it starts to look more and more cluttered. Get towards Elk Rapids, you see more of that. Granted, it is far from the road, but still.
So our current ordinance does say no outdoor storage of vehicles, goods, or materials for self-storage, rental buildings, warehousing. It does include some building spacing, so it says a building having a height of 10 feet should be set back from each other a minimum of 28 feet, and then higher, you have to go 3 feet for each additional foot in height separated. I'm not sure if there's a good reason for that. I mean, we'd have the fire department review our plans to make sure they can get a truck where they need to get it regardless.
Yep, I would keep it that way.
Okay. Cool.
Just a small note, I don't think it's worthy of discussion. I noticed ingress and egress points, distance from an intersection. In some places it's 60 feet, some places it's 50 feet. I don't think there's any magic to that. I don't know. Consistency is always good.
Yeah. Sarah, is that just something that could be scanned through and unless there's a specific reason?
Yeah.
Probably the more conservative is generally better. Like I guess 60 feet as opposed to 50.
Yeah.
Picking between the two.
I don't know. It's hard to eyeball that, but, you know.
Six 24 was one that in the committee we thought we should keep in, but that the planning commission might want to go deeper into it.
Yeah, extractive industries. That's another one, well, same but different. So extractive industries, the state has said that mining in general, for whatever aggregate you're mining for, is a natural resource, similar to oil and gas wells. So they've taken away a lot of the ability for the local government to regulate mining operations because of that. So unless you're kind of end up regulating the secondary effects of the use itself, since the natural resource exists where it exists and, people have to apply for it. So, can't remember if we put it. Let me see. We didn't actually put it in any zoning districts. Just the words in Article 6 are here. So if you had somebody similar to sexually oriented businesses where we would say it's not in the zoning district, you can add it into that district. Here's the regulations that we would have available to the planning commission, so you don't have to come up with them should somebody want to add that use. You either are going to go extractive industries are allowed a special use permit in all your districts or none of your districts. There's no good way about it. I mean, essentially the state tied our hands behind our back and then told the public to come yell at us about the use and put the townships and local governments in a very difficult position when dealing with this use. They've talked about taking away all local regulations on it, but they've not done that. This was, and just of note, this was one of the fastest pieces of legislature that went through the mining.
But like
Bill.
you could, so we might not be able to stop somebody from pulling, if somebody strikes gold and they start pulling, but we could
Right.
regulate that they can't do it at midnight and having backing up trucks
Correct.
and blowing, blasting stuff.
Right, yeah, because you're regulating those secondary noise and pollution effects to the neighbors. So they can do it, they just have to comply.
Right, okay. So where does that leave us then? Leaving it in as a reference if we need it?
Yeah, if you're comfortable with that, unless you'd like to put it into all the districts
No.
for later on. I'm guessing there's not much here. I mean, a lot of the materials have already been found. It's rare that we get a new case where someone starts opening a mining operation. But as resources become more scarce, there may be an opportunity for somebody to come along and find something here. I'm not
Sand.
sure. Right, that's what I mean. Maybe, You need sand too, but there's cheaper places to buy sand than Torch Lake Township. So.
I had noted one thing in D that we would add something to help protect the township, something about being reviewed, updated yearly to adjust for inflation or something like that.
Oh, the performance guarantee.
Yeah.
Let me see. I mean, we must have done that for cell towers. Let me.
Yeah.
I'll make a note though.
We skipped 625 because we took that one out.
Correct.
626,
Still exists.
and it seems like we did discuss this a little bit.
Yeah. So some of this language pushes back into state law about telecommunication towers, what they're allowed to do, and then new towers. So really, you're regulating here new towers. So if somebody wants to add equipment on an existing tower or change out equipment on an existing tower, they're not coming back to the planning commission, but the state tells us that we can't require them to. They can co-locate on an existing tower and all of that. But these would be for new towers.
We took out wind turbines as well.
Yep. And then the upland game bird hunting preserves, this comes out of your current zoning ordinance. It's a very specific use, again, something I'm assuming at one time was a big deal, and that's why it's here. I don't know if we have any operational.
We did where?
Maybe it's just a proposal. During the loans got a year.
The thing I'll say about that is it doesn't require fencing or any sort of protection. You could wander onto a site and
Fencing may
Boy.
make sense.
get some bird shot in the back of the head.
Yeah, that's a good point.
Yeah, I like that. We can add that in there. Okay. So we can pick up with Article 7 at the next meeting?
I think so. Just real quick, we did skip over distilleries and all that. Was there any comments there?
Oh, did I miss that?
Wineries, breweries, and distilleries.
Completely missed it, yes. This language is different than your current ordinance. I find your current language to be overly complicated and also I've had it challenged in other townships, the same language. So this is kind of streamlining it. We do allow wineries. Small wineries are a special use in the ag district, in the village district, and the commercial district.
So the wording that's in here is not the same as what we've got.
Correct.
This will address it.
Yes.
And Sarah, because this one, we could see a lot of this activity, upcoming. So this, from your experience, or you wouldn't put it in here otherwise, but I guess I'm just asking the question of, this would address all the concerns that you've had, and you've kind of tested this language in other spots, so to speak.
Yeah, I mean, I think that it's how what type of use you want to have here. I think wineries, breweries, and distilleries do have a big impact or can have a big impact in your agricultural district. It's one of those uses, again, where everybody talks about it, and oh, that'd be cool, and that's nice. But this is a industrial operation that you're putting in, especially in your ag district. Commercial and village, not as big of a deal. You will have, your ag district has larger property where you're dealing with wastewater, especially from like a brewery. Distillery may have some waste product that they do. A lot of people end up feeding it back to animals in some form, the spent grain. So I believe right now that they are allowed in your ag district all the same, but I think it is an opportunity for some, they're permitted use in your ag district currently. So I don't know. I'm conflicted personally because I've seen times where it works really nice and I've seen times where it just really gets exploited and turns into something that you're not used to having in your ag district. Just because you're putting cherries into wine or a distillery or something like that, making it into a brandy doesn't mean necessarily it needs to be in your ag district.
Well, personally, I'm ready to move on and try to close this up. I think we're all tired, but this is an important enough one that maybe we kind of tidy up, finish up section 6, and maybe in our next meeting, we hit this one if there's any other thoughts you have, Sarah, just because, this one could be a pretty significant,
That's a good
movement of
point.
stuff going on in our township pretty quickly.
Yeah.
Maybe you could tell us what's wrong with what we got today.
Yeah.
The troublesome language, as I have noted.
Troublesome language. Yes,
I
we
just don't
can
want us
start
to
here
make
again.
Yeah.
Any quick decisions when we're tired and,
Yep.
something that's important as
Works
this.
for
So-
me. I can appreciate that.
But we are done with section 6. The next ones are shorter, but we're not going to do them tonight. So any other questions on what we just finished for the evening before we move into the next part of the agenda? Hearing none, I think we move into the ongoing reports. Sarah, is there anything you'd like to report out?
You were emailed a copy of the zoning administrator's report. There's also a copy on your desk if you have any interest in that. If you have any questions, feel free to let us know.
Okay. Any questions from the commission for Sarah on that? The representative from the ZBA?
I believe we had a meeting August 15th. The attorney spoke on formats of meetings, the
Training, kind of.
training,
Mhm.
right.
Okay. Any questions for Kevin? And then we don't have our board member report tonight, so guess now we move off and go into public comments. Anybody has public comments they'd like to make, please step forward. Appreciate your
Yay,
patience. We had
stuck
one
it
person hold out.
Well, I'm here for
Oh.
this. But something that was.
Could you
in my
please, I'm
mind-
sorry, could you please state your name
Yes, I'm sorry. Christine Whitaker Clark,
and your address?
12295 Arrowhead Drive.
Great, thank you.
When I was listening to the developer, something that was raised, there was a lot of acknowledgement of the increased traffic, which that is our neighborhood. So I agree with that completely. But something that was not addressed is the potential for increased pedestrian traffic. And I think Denise and Jeff, we all cross that intersection very frequently. It's quite treacherous as it is. And I think if you're, increasing that population, part of the draw of that location, as he even said, was the proximity to the Torch Lake access site. So there's a, increased possibility for walkability to that as well as Torchlight Cafe. And I see that as a potential issue. I mean, it's dangerous. It's a dangerous intersection to drive through, but it's very dangerous to walk across. So I submit that it should be addressed at some point as well. That's all.
Excellent, thank you. Any other public comments this evening? Hearing none. Concerns of the commission? I think from my standpoint, appreciate everybody's patience tonight and good questions for the applicant. I did have one comment, Sarah, going forward as it relates to the rest of the chapters. So we've got 7, 8, and 9, and then 2 others. So we've got 5 more chapters. I think most of them are pretty straightforward, aren't they?
Yeah, most of them are more administrative.
Okay. So I think in the next meeting, which is October 23rd,
Yes, so I missed putting that on your agenda for the next meeting, but I did send out an email about that. So I guess I want to check in October 23rd at 7 PM. It's a Monday night to make sure that you're available to attend that meeting.
I think our objective in that October 23rd would be to get through these last 5 chapters. We won't
Correct. That
rush
would be
it,
the-
But
that
we
would-
will try to get through them.
Yep.
And then I think we'd be done. Worst case, I guess, we'd have one more after that, but we're getting real close. Then the only other thing I wanted to mention to you was kind of plant seeds in everyone's minds here is master planning. So we have $15,000.
Can't remember if it's 10 or 15.
I think it's 15,000. Little birdie just mentioned that, little sitting on my shoulder here, $15,000 we have. So I think, there's been some townships, well, Elk Rapids has just done a pretty good kind of engagement sentiment, sessions with the community to try to get input on it. I think, Sarah, you were involved with that, were you not? Or your firm was involved with that?
Correct. Yep, that's one of my
Some really
projects.
positive feedback around that. And so one thing I'd like to suggest to the commission, and maybe we'll pick this up next time when we're all fresh, but that we start that engagement process, maybe get ideas about, maybe we could start thinking about a survey, but also engage a professional organization that could help us run through this process, get the engagement from the community, help us put together a really high quality master plan. We've had a lot of discussions around it. So I want to get that process going and tap into that 15,000 at least to get started, and then at least kind of scope out what we'll need for next year so we can get the board's support on that. So that next year we'll have this ordinance done in place, we can go full force into that master plan and then bring that forward next year. So
Yeah.
just want to plant that seed.
Yeah, and I think that's important too. Our fiscal year ends at the end of March, so there's still that opportunity to utilize that money towards a survey or some community engagement. I think that it'll be hard to do some sort of an open house in the winter months just because, the population is not all here. I think you'd receive some criticism if you started
Sure.
having in-person. Not to say that you can't do some sort of a hybrid or Zoom or something like that as well. Still have a lot of good luck with Zoom participation. Even though everybody likes to be back in person now, there are some opportunities to still do that and have people participate from afar. But absolutely, I think getting started working on a survey, and we'll have this zoning ordinance kind of wrapping up. So as we're going through the process of adoption, that you can start talking about that and starting that master plan process.
Yeah, and take the winter to plan for it. So right when we get into April, bang, we start running with it when people are here.
Yeah, we can use next summer to get that in-person engagement.
Yep, that sounds good. Okay, any concerns of commission members? No? Sarah, anything for you?
No, we already talked about the special meeting, so I'm good.
Okay, so given that we've accomplished everything I think we set out for tonight, I'd like to request a motion to adjourn tonight's meeting.
So moved.
We have a second? Discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Hearing none, it's 9:11. Ooh, bad time, 9:10. It's 9:10, it's adjourned,
It was 9:10.
isn't it?
Yeah, it was.